In less than 24 hours, there was 2 Wisconsin teens shot by police officers inside their schools. None had guns, but weapons. You said after these incidents, and quote, "We've got to take action to work and make these incidents less likely." How would you plan to do that?
I think there are a lot of things we need to be looking at, both to make these incidents less likely and to make sure that we're prepared to respond to these incidents if they happen. So first, we have an Office of School Safety that's been working with schools around the state to help them identify threats before they develop. They put out a threat assessment protocol. Earlier this year, there was representatives from the United States Secret Service who were there talking about what a strong protocol it was, and we encourage schools around the state to look at that protocol so that they can identify threats before they happen. It's also important that students who need services like mental health services or other counseling have access to mental health professionals or social workers in our schools. So investing in those areas is important as well. And although these 2 incidents, one involved a knife and one involved a pellet gun, we've certainly seen in shootings around the country that in a number of these cases, firearms have been involved and impacted safety at schools. So including in the discussion common sense gun safety measures, to me, is a common sense way to go about looking at this issue.
U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, who's from Oshkosh, where one of these incidents happened, said preventing students from bringing weapons in schools is impossible. Would you agree?
It's certainly difficult. I mean, we've got to figure out ways that we can work to reduce the likelihood that anybody's going to be showing up in schools with weapons. But having good information with social workers talking to students, with students feeling empowered to identify potential threats, as happened in one of these incidents, that can help us stop these problems before they move forward. So we've got to work to do what we can to reduce the likelihood that these events are going to happen.
Both incidents in Oshkosh and Waukesha, school resource officers stepped in to help. But not every school district has these types of resources to have officers like that. Should there be the discussion again about arming teachers?
I don't think we should be arming teachers, and in neither of these cases was the issue that a teacher was armed. These were both school resource officers who are trained law enforcement professionals. If we arm teachers, that's going to introduce a danger into our classrooms that isn't present right now, that the possibility that a firearm could be misused or could be grabbed by a student is too high to put that danger in our schools. I think that local school districts need to look at what's most effective for their students as to safety issues. If they have repeated threats or repeated concerns, and they think an option like school resource officers is going to help make schools safer, that's something that I would encourage them to look at. But I think this is something where the people who are administering the schools are going to have a good sense of what types of specific options are most effective for their schools.
But what about rural districts that can't afford to have a school resource officer?
Well, areas that have resource constraints, first of all, I encourage them to contact our Office of School Safety so that sort of shared resources, things like the threat assessment protocol that districts across the state can use, are things that they can put into effect in their districts. But I also think that, again, investing in things like social work, like mental health counseling, those sorts of things can stop threats before they happen.
Over the summer, DOJ said only about 100 schools completed their school safety grants. They were used for things like intercom systems, some were shatterproof glass, and also mental health resources. What's the status of that? How many schools have not completed these upgrades or invested in mental health?
That's an ongoing process. The vast majority of the funds for school safety were awarded a while ago, and now we're in the process of schools using those funds and then submitting requests for reimbursement. But one of the things that our Office of School Safety has been doing is providing trainings to schools around the state so that teachers do know how to respond to these sorts of crisis situations, and that they can also identify signs that somebody may pose a threat so that they're prepared to intervene before an incident like this happens.
Should there be more of an urgency on the schools that haven't completed all of their upgrades or mental health resources?
I think that schools that haven't gone through that process and are ready to do it should move forward with that. Again, what each school needs depends on the specific circumstances of those schools and what their physical security measures are like currently. There are also common sense measures that schools can take to make sure that students are safe. Here's a simple one. Locking the doors in classrooms in schools helps make students safer. That's something that schools around the state should be doing. But they should also be looking into these other measures like threat assessment protocols that can help make schools as safe as they can be.
Should lawmakers be considering increasing funding for these school safety grants, possibly more additional funding for it?
What I'd like to see the legislature take a look at is increasing funding for our Office of School Safety. They provided a very large one-time grant, and that supported a lot of the physical security upgrades that we've seen. But I think having that office continue and having it play a role, both training around the state, developing guidelines like school safety guidelines and the threat assessment protocol that they developed, and also working on providing policy solutions is an important step. But what we really need to see is the legislature come together and take action so that we can continue moving forward on this issue. There hasn't been much significant debate on school safety issues in the current legislative session. I'd like to see the legislature come back and keep working on that issue.
I want to bring up threats when it comes to a student making a threat about a school. In Washington County and Germantown last week, a student made a threat which was later deemed not credible by police. But this occurs so often now, students making these threats and saying it wasn't serious. Do you think there should be more severe punishment when students make these threats?
I think that we do need to look at updating our threat laws in general. Right now, there are certain types of threats that can result in criminal charges, but there are many types of threats that don't ultimately result in criminal charges. I'm hoping that we will see draft legislation in this session that's going to expand the types of threats that can lead to charges. When it comes to students and juveniles, people who would end up in the juvenile system, we've also got to take those opportunities to intervene, because if students, especially kids, are making threats to schools, something very serious is going wrong in their lives, and we need to have an intervention so that whatever assistance they need to get things on the right track, we're able to provide those resources.